Hello, welcome to Exotic Gardening with me, Yorkshire Kris. On this week's episode, we're stuck in the greenhouse because it's very wet and windy outside. So I'm here in the greenhouse and it looks pretty bare, and that is because I've pretty much emptied out everything and started to tidy up, ready for bringing in the tender plants before winter strikes. And although we've had a couple of frosts so far this year, we had one in September and we've had one in October, it's only been down to just above zero. So we've not had a proper cold air frost to damage any plants, and all my plants are pretty much still outside, and only a couple have had the slightest bit of damage on the most exposed leaves. But in the greenhouse today, I'm just going to show you a few jobs that I'm going to be doing because it's too wet and windy outside. One of them is looking at these cuttings that I took just a week ago. So starting thinking about propagation now because I want to keep my tender plants going from year to year. And in here, if I take off the lid of this hydropod, we can see we've got lots of colourful variegated foliage plants. We've got the Plectranthus and the Iracines, various different types in here. And these are all, just pick one out, just in a little foam pad that is sitting over some warm water that sprinkles up into the air. I've just turned it off for now because it's quite loud, as you'll hear. So that sprinkled water, and it keeps it nice and moist and humid around the base of these stems where the roots will form. It's only been a few days so far, like I said, so we've not got many roots forming yet. Give it another week and pretty much all of these will have rooted, and then they could be potted up and then put on the windowsill or kept warm on a heat pad over winter. But I am trying to minimise spending lots of money on electricity because it's very expensive. So I'm not heating the full greenhouse. Last year I reduced the temperatures down to about 8 degrees. This year I'll probably go down to 5 degrees. But things like this won't be happy at those temperatures. So these will go on the windowsill in my house and also into the heated propagator, which I'll heat the base. Even though the air temperature might only be 5 degrees, the roots will be nice and warm at about 20-25 degrees, hopefully. So that is what will happen to these cuttings probably in a couple of weeks when I pot those up. Like I say, it's wet and windy, awful outside, and the garden itself is getting battered. But when it's warm and sunny, or when it's sunny at this time of year, it still looks good because we've not had those really harsh frosts. So we'll go around the garden on a sunnier, less windy day soon, and we can have a nice tour of the garden as we approach November. But for now, we're inside in this video. So I was talking about the heated propagator just a moment ago. Here it is. This is my Vitapod propagator, which has different layers to make it different heights depending on how tall the plants are. At the moment it's open, and in here just got a few things. Got a few cuttings, so we've got some wonderful Plectranthus variegated cuttings here that are well rooted, and these will spend the winter in here where it's nice and warm. I've also got something a bit more unusual. Doesn't look much now, but in here we've got an onset banana that I decapitated, got all the foliage off, and I've cut through the top of the comb layer, and already we're seeing signs of life. I've done this to propagate it, so I've done my propagating video. I've shown that just a week or two ago on my channel. This is a slightly different way because I've not cut it into 4 full sections. I've just cut down halfway down just to promote the growth of pups. So we'll see how that goes over winter. I've done this before and it should work, but this is on the small side, so it's just, it should work. We might not get too many because it is quite a small onset that I've done this with. So we'll see how that goes. And I'm going to put more plants in here. Like I said, I'm going to put the cuttings in here, and the most tender plants will go in here over winter. So I really need to start filling this up now. Now last year I visited Kevin Spence's garden down in Loughborough, which was a fantastic experience in all the wonderful exotic plants that he's got in his garden, and I did a garden tour video which I'll do a link of in the description below. But Kevin was very generous and gave me some seedlings of a couple of different plants which I've potted up and grown on in my greenhouse for the last 12 months, and they look pretty similar to each other. We've got two plants with strappy green leaves, and these are all seedlings. We've got a palm tree. This is Trachycarpus nanus, which is the dwarf Trachycarpus. Very often doesn't grow a trunk, and it has the leaves coming out of the ground pretty much with just a very small trunk at the ground level, and sometimes the trunk grows underground as well. So these are seedlings, very slow growing. They're a bit susceptible to red spider mite, but luckily these have been fine over the last 12 months in these pots. And the other plant we've got next to them looks like a palm seedling as well. I'll just show you that one. Got fuzzy tomentomum on the leaves, but this isn't a palm. It is a plant that looks like a palm, but it's actually Curculigo crassifolia, which is very similar in appearance really. So the grassy palm, Sitara palmifolia, again not a palm tree, but this one might have a little bit of hardiness about it, but I'm not going to chance it. I'm growing in these individual pots, and I really like the look of these leaves. Like I said, they're very palm-like with the ribbed leaves and the tomentum and the fuzziness on the both sides of the leaves, and they should grow to a decent size with quite large strappy leaves, like I said, like a juvenile palm tree, and almost like a coconut palm when it first appears with those big arching leaves before they divide. So an unusual plant for sure, and these have been in the greenhouse for the last 12 months, and it's pretty shady on this side of the greenhouse, so they've not grown super fast, but they've established. I've potted them on a couple of times, and you can see we've got roots out the base of some of the pots as well. But these will stay in here over winter, and then we'll see next year. We'll put them outside, we'll see if we can grow them on, and eventually we'll grow much bigger and have some unusual flowers as well. So that's two unusual plants I've got in the greenhouse. Now, something I was really happy to receive last week is a new book. Now, gardening books are very well worth reading, obviously, but you don't often get a new book looking at exotic gardening, or in this case, The Dry Exotic Garden by Paul Spracklin, who lives in Essex and has been gardening for over 40 years, exotic gardening, and his current garden he's had for 30 years, and he's grown a wide range of xerophytic, so plants that like dry conditions, and these arid plants thrive in his Essex garden, which has low rainfall. But he's also travelled to the homeland of many of these plants, so Mexico, where a lot of yuccas and agaves come from. And this new book, like I said, arrived last week, and I have a good read through this book, and it's something to do on a day like this. It's been wet and windy outside. I can stay inside the greenhouse and read a new book, and it's a very good book if you're interested in growing arid style plants, so yuccas, aloes, agaves, anything like that, even cacti, whether you want to grow them in pots outside or in the ground. This book covers pretty much all the plants that you may find or seek to find, either from seed or as plants from garden centres, nurseries, or online. And there's valuable information about how these plants have adapted to growing in dry conditions, and how you can actually grow these plants in your garden by changing the soil, by changing how you think about keeping them dry over winter. Really, really good practical advice from Paul. And there's lots of sort of case studies, look at other people's gardens around the country to show that you can actually grow arid style plants all across the UK. There's good sections in this book on different types of plants. So we talk about the main ones, so the aloes and the agaves, cacti, but there's lesser known types of plants as well. So we look at things like crassula, we look at dudleya, we look at all sorts of plants that you may not have thought about in your first thought about arid plants, but the more you sort of look into these weird and wonderful plants with the succulent leaves, there's actually lots of different types that you can grow in your garden with protection, or actually just in the ground with no protection. There's a good section early on looking at what hardiness is, why it's better to protect plants in most gardens, and also lots of things in terms of soil conditions, growing in pots, growing in the ground, and air circulation and propagation. So it covers all sorts of things to do with growing arid plants. And there's also a good section on design, thinking about space, thinking about how the plants will look in a border or in the full garden as well. And what I like about this book is there's lots and lots of really good photographs of all these plants. Pretty much all the photographs in the book have been photographed by Paul. He's visited all his gardens. He in fact visited my garden last year, looking at the dry plants, the agaves I've got on the palms, but he came on one of the wettest, coldest summer days I ever remember. It was absolutely freezing and soaking wet, and Paul had a very good look around the garden, really good chat with him. He took a few photographs, but I didn't think they would make it into the book because it was so wet and dark that day for a July day. But actually there's a couple of pictures from my garden in the book as well, so I'm pleased to see those. I'm pleased to see some other photographs of people's gardens that I visited as well, showing that you can grow arid plants up north as well as a more typical southeast, and also down in Cornwall and the islands off the UK. What's especially great about this book is the first-hand experience of growing these exotic plants, these arid plants, and also seeing them in situ in their native habitat as well, and being able to really sort of define what the characteristics are for some of the species that are quite closely related. So we think about yuccas, a lot do look very similar, and the same with agaves, a lot do look very similar. So looking at the differences that Paul's been able to see in habitat and from cultivation and describe them eloquently in this book is great to read, and it increases your knowledge if you read books like this. I think Paul's done a great job, a concise job of putting together all the information from all these various different arid style plants. It's full of fantastic photographs. You can actually, be inspired to grow these plants, many of which you may never have heard of before. Because yes, you can use the internet. We all use social media. We all look at people's videos. We all look at photographs. But actually seeing them all in one place, in hard copy, in a book, I think is fantastic and is really inspiring. So definitely try to pick up a copy of The Dry Exotic Garden by Paul Spracklin. It's a fantastic book. Now, Aloe polyphylla is one of my favourite arid plants, and it's one featured in Paul's book, and it's really easy to start off growing from seed, and they grow surprisingly quickly. So you can go from a seedling to a good garden worthy plant within 3 or 4 years, and even just after a year it's a nice little plant. And I've done a video of how to propagate these from seed before. I'm going to propagate them from seed again today. So I've got a nice clear pot, clean pot, and it's full of tepid water, so it's not cold from the tap, it's got some warmth from the warm tap in there. And I've got some seed, which thanks to Drill Robinson gave me some fresh seed from his plant this year. And unlike most arid plants, which you wouldn't think about wanting lots of water, Aloe polyphylla can be successfully germinated just by sprinkling the seed in a pot of water. So that is what we're going to do now. I'll open this little packet, get the seeds onto my hand, and there's actually a good 20 seeds in here, and germination rate is very high. So all we do, we get the pot of water, we get the seeds, we just sprinkle them on there, and those seeds will germinate over the next few weeks. Now this water will cool down if I just leave it in the greenhouse here, so I'm going to put this in the propagator where it stays at a rough 20 degrees, and it won't take long, like I said, a few weeks, and we'll start to see these seedlings sprouting. And as soon as you do that and you get the little sprout, then it's time to pot these up. So that'll be another job I'll be doing in a few months' time here in the greenhouse. And then by next spring we'll have little plants, and then by the end of summer we'll have nice plants in individual pots that are very good to have as pot plants for a few years before considering planting them in the ground, because with protection they can see down to -6, -8. I've lost a few in the garden, but I've also had some looking great for 6, 7, 8 years, by which time they can grow to a good sort of 50-60 centimeters across and flower. And as we've seen in Joel's garden, he's successfully grown some large specimens in his garden in West Yorkshire and seen them flower as well. So it's definitely an interesting plant to grow in a container and potentially outside in the ground as well. So this was a quick video showing a few of the things I'm doing in the greenhouse. So we've sown some seeds, we've got some cuttings in the propagator, and we've also looked at some interesting seedlings that are growing away as well. Over the next few weeks, as we get to the end of October into November, I really will start my overwintering process of bringing in those tender plants and thinking about protecting the plants that are staying out all over winter. So join me on a weekly basis as we go through the overwintering process. If you've got any questions, put it in the comments below. If you like the content of my videos, and if you've not done so already, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can continue seeing my videos on a weekly basis. Thank you for watching this edition of Exotic Gardening. Join me next week where we're doing more in the garden.